Innocence has a price in the 41st millennium, and the Imperium collects it with ruthless efficiency. In the underhive of Necromunda, a child who has never seen natural light learns to strip a lasgun in 14 seconds. Her fingers, small enough to reach the weapon's most delicate components, work with the precision of someone twice her age. She does not know her real name. The Manufactorum overseers call her 77 Delta, and when she completes her quota of 40 weapons per day, she receives a ration bar that tastes of recycled protein and industrial lubricant. The other children in the assembly line do not speak to her. They learned long ago that friendship is a luxury that draws the attention of the taskmasters, and attention from the taskmasters means pain. This girl is 8 years old. In 3 years she will be old enough to hold the very weapons she assembles. In 5 years she will carry one into battle. In 7 years, if she lives that long, she will teach other children how to die for the Emperor. The Imperium does not call this child labor. It calls it early vocational training. The difference is not semantic. It is doctrinal, carved into the very foundation of imperial law with the same fervor that built the cathedrals on Terra. Children are not workers, they are investments. They are not soldiers. They are future assets. They are not victims. They are blessed with purpose before they are old enough to understand what purpose means. The Schola Progenium stands as the Imperium's most visible monument to this philosophy, but it is far from the only institution that feeds on young minds and bodies. From the forge worlds of the Adeptus Mechanicus to the death worlds that spawn the Imperial Guard's most elite regiments, the machinery of war consumes children with an appetite that would shame the great devourer itself. Yet the Imperium does not merely use children, it transforms them, it sanctifies their suffering, it makes them grateful for the chance to bleed. On the agri-world of Morven Prime, children as young as 6 work 18-hour shifts in the grain processing plants that feed 3 sectors of the Imperium. Their small hands are perfect for reaching into the machinery when it jams, and their light bodies can crawl through ventilation shafts to clear blockages that would require expensive servitors to remove. The overseers tell them they are heroes, that every grain of wheat they process might feed a space marine, that their sacrifice keeps the Imperium strong. When a child is crushed in the machinery, as happens every few weeks, the overseers hold a brief ceremony. They tell the other children that the dead one has been blessed by the Emperor, that his sacrifice has meaning. They do not mention that his body will be processed into protein paste for the next week's rations. The children believe them. Why would they not? They have never known a world where adults tell them different truths. In the depths of Hive Tertius on Armageddon, children too young to hold a rifle are pressed into service as ammunition runners. They dart between trenches and bunkers, carrying bandoliers of bullets and power packs for lasguns, their small size making them harder targets for enemy snipers. The Astra Militarum calls them little eagles, a term of endearment that masks a grim calculus. A child killed while carrying ammunition represents a loss of 37 throne gelts in equipment and perhaps 6 months of basic training. A trained guardsman killed while fetching his own ammunition represents a loss of 14 years of conditioning, 3 years of specialized training, and approximately 4,000 throne gelts in equipment and medical augmentation. The mathematics are undeniable. The children do not understand the mathematics. They understand only that the older soldiers smile when they bring bullets quickly, and that speed means survival. Some of them begin to run faster than humanly possible, their small hearts hammering with stimulants that the medics inject to keep them useful. Their life expectancy drops to 18 months, but their efficiency increases by 23%. The Departamento Munitorum files these statistics under operational improvements. But it is in the Schola Progenium that the Imperium's use of children achieves something approaching artistry. The orphanages that dot every world in the Imperium serve as more than educational institutions. They are factories for producing faith, workshops for crafting loyalty so pure that it transcends reason itself. The children who enter these institutions do so carrying the weight of their parents' deaths, most often parents who died in service to the Emperor. They arrive broken, traumatized, desperate for meaning in a universe that has stripped away everything they knew. The scholar does not heal these wounds, it weaponizes them. Sister Superior Mordian watches the newest arrivals file into the orientation hall of the Schola Progenium on Vos Prime. 23 children, ages ranging from 7 to 13, their faces bearing the hollow stare of fresh grief. She has seen this expression thousands of times over her 40-year career as an instructor. It is the look of children who have learned that safety is an illusion, that love can be torn away in an instant, that the universe is vast and cruel and utterly indifferent to their suffering. In the secular institutions of ancient Terra, such children would have been offered therapy, comfort, time to process their trauma. The scholar offers something far more valuable. It offers them the chance to transform their pain into purpose. The orientation begins with prayer. Not the gentle, comforting prayers that might soothe a child's fears, but the harsh, demanding liturgies of the Imperial Creed. The children kneel on cold stone floors for 2 hours, their voices hoarse from reciting words they do not yet understand. Their knees bleed, their voices crack, some of them weep, though they try to hide it. Sister Superior Mordian watches them carefully, noting which children endure the discomfort without complaint, which ones help their weaker neighbors, which ones show the early signs of the fanaticism that will make them useful servants of the Emperor. After prayer comes education, though the scholar's definition of education would be unrecognizable to teachers from more civilized ages. The children learn to read, but only sacred texts and military manuals. They learn mathematics, but only as it applies to calculating firing solutions and supply logistics. They learn history, but only the glorious victories of the Imperium and the bitter price of heresy. Most importantly, they learn to think of themselves not as individuals, but as components in the vast machine of imperial glory. Their names are replaced with numerical designations. Their personal belongings are confiscated and burned. Their memories of life before the scholar are gradually eroded through careful psychological conditioning that the instructors call spiritual purification. The children adapt because children always adapt. They learn to find comfort in routine, strength in discipline, identity in service. By the time they are 10 years old, most of them cannot remember what their parents looked like. By the time they are 12, they cannot imagine wanting anything other than to serve the Emperor. By the time they are 14, they are ready to die for him without hesitation, and they consider this readiness the greatest gift they could possibly possess. Some of them are selected for the Adepta Sororitas, where their faith will be forged into a weapon as deadly as any bolter. Others join the Adeptus Arbites, where their loyalty will be used to enforce imperial law with uncompromising brutality. A few, the most promising, are chosen for the Officio Assassinorum, where their childhood trauma will be refined into perfect, emotionless killing machines. But most of them will join the vast bureaucracy of the Adeptus Administratum, where they will spend their lives processing the paperwork that turns living beings into statistics, resources into quotas, suffering into acceptable losses. They will do this work with joy because they have been taught that there is no higher calling than to serve the Emperor, and they will never question whether the Emperor they serve bears any resemblance to the ancient figure who once walked among humanity with compassion in his heart. The transformation is not without cost. The scholar's medical records, buried deep in archives that few are authorized to access, tell a different story than the propaganda films that glorify imperial education. Suicide rates among scholar students run 17% higher than the imperial average. Self-harm incidents occur at a rate of 3 per day in even small facilities. Psychological breakdown, classified as spiritual weakness in official documentation, affects nearly 30% of students before graduation. These statistics are not hidden out of shame, but out of operational security. The Imperium cannot afford for its enemies to know that its most fanatically loyal servants are also its most psychologically damaged. On the Forge world of Ryza, the children destined for the Adeptus Mechanicus undergo modifications that would be considered abominations on any civilized world. The youngest initiates, some barely out of infancy, receive their first mechanical implants before their bones have finished growing. The surgery is performed without anesthesia, not as an act of cruelty, but as a test of devotion. The children who scream are marked as weak. The children who endure in silence are marked for advancement. The children who smile during the procedure are marked for greatness. By the time these children reach adolescence, they retain little that could be called human. Their emotions have been dampened by neural implants. Their memories have been selectively edited to remove distracting experiences of love, play, or wonder. Their bodies have been systematically replaced with mechanical components that serve the Omnissiah's will more efficiently than flesh ever could. They do not mourn their lost humanity because they have been taught that humanity itself is weakness, that flesh is corruption, that the highest aspiration of any thinking being is to cast off the limitations of biology in favor of the purity of the machine. These children turned machines will grow up to design the weapons that kill millions, to build the ships that carry soldiers to die on distant worlds, to calculate the optimal ratios of human suffering required to maintain imperial productivity. They will do this work with the same emotional detachment with which they once endured their own surgeries, because they have been systematically stripped of the capacity to feel empathy for organic life. The tech priests who oversee their training keep detailed records of the modification process, not out of scientific curiosity, but to optimize the conversion of future children. They have determined that the optimal age for initial implantation is 4 years and 7 months, when the child's personality is still malleable but their motor functions have developed sufficiently to handle basic mechanical interfaces. They have calculated that children who retain fond memories of their parents require 17% more reconditioning than orphans. They have discovered that children who show artistic inclinations respond poorly to emotional dampening and should be redirected toward purely technical specializations. These calculations are performed by adults who were once children subjected to the same process, their childhood wonder and compassion transformed into cold efficiency by the very system they now perpetuate. But perhaps nowhere is the Imperium's use of children more systematically cruel than in the recruitment and training of its psychers. The black ships that prowl the galaxy in search of psychically gifted individuals do not distinguish between adults and children. A 6-year-old who accidentally sets fire to her bedroom with an uncontrolled burst of pyrokinesis is as much a threat to Imperial stability as a 40-year-old rogue psyker who summons daemons for personal gain. Both will be collected with the same ruthless efficiency. The children taken by the black ships face a journey that breaks most adult minds. Chained in psychically dampening cells that suppress their abilities so thoroughly that many forget how to speak, they are transported across the galaxy to Terra in voyages that can last months or even years. The ship's holds are packed with hundreds of psychers, their psychic screams creating a constant background of mental anguish that drives many of the crew to madness. The children, lacking the psychological defenses of adults, suffer more intensely than any other passengers. Many of them die during the voyage, their minds simply shutting down under the weight of terror and isolation. Those who survive the journey face trials that make the Schola Progenium seem merciful by comparison. On Terra, they are subjected to psychological testing that determines their ultimate fate. The strongest and most stable are selected for training as sanctioned psychers, a process that involves years of mental conditioning designed to transform their raw psychic talent into a weapon the Imperium can safely deploy. The weaker ones are fed to the Golden Throne, their souls consumed to maintain the psychic beacon that guides Imperial ships through the warp. The weakest are simply executed, their potential threat to Imperial security deemed too great to ignore. The children selected for sanctioned psyker training endure conditioning that would shatter most adult minds. They are forced to watch their fellow students die in training exercises, learning to view psychic death as an acceptable cost of education. They are subjected to artificial possession by carefully controlled daemon entities, teaching them to resist warp corruption through exposure to its most seductive temptations. They are forced to use their powers to kill live subjects, usually condemned criminals or captured heretics, learning to overcome any natural reluctance to take life. By the time their training is complete, these children have become perfect weapons in human form. Their empathy has been carefully excised, replaced with absolute loyalty to imperial doctrine. Their natural curiosity has been channeled into narrow specializations that serve military objectives. Their capacity for joy has been suppressed, leaving only grim satisfaction in duty well performed. They are no longer children in any meaningful sense, though their bodies may still be young. They are tools, crafted from human raw material but shaped entirely by imperial need. The Imperium celebrates these transformations as triumphs of human will over chaotic corruption. The children themselves, those who retain enough individual consciousness to have opinions, agree with this assessment. They have been taught that their suffering was necessary, that their lost innocence was a small price to pay for the privilege of serving the Emperor, that their psychological destruction was actually a form of spiritual rebirth. They believe these lessons because they have never been given any reason to doubt them. In the vast libraries of the Adeptus Administratum, clerks who were once Schola Progenium students compile reports on the efficiency of child utilization across imperial space. They calculate optimal ratios of education to indoctrination, measure the correlation between childhood trauma and adult loyalty, project future manpower needs based on current mortality rates among juvenile workers. Their reports are written in the dry, clinical language of bureaucracy, but behind every statistic lies a child's broken dreams. Every percentage point represents thousands of young lives consumed by the imperial war machine. These clerks perform their work with the same mechanical precision they learned as children, their capacity for emotional response to human suffering carefully excised through years of systematic conditioning. They see nothing wrong with treating children as renewable resources because they have been trained since childhood to see all human life in terms of utility to the Imperium. They are not monsters. They are products of a system that transforms natural human compassion into cold efficiency, and they execute their duties with the satisfaction of craftsmen who have perfected their trade. On distant battlefields, child soldiers march alongside adult guardsmen, their small hands clutching weapons nearly as tall as they are. They have been given stimulant injections to increase their aggression and neural conditioning to suppress their fear responses. Many of them will not live to see their 15th birthday, but they face death with the same grim determination as veterans twice their age. They sing imperial hymns as they charge enemy positions, their young voices rising above the thunder of artillery and the scream of dying men. The adult soldiers who fight beside them have learned not to form emotional attachments to these children. Experience has taught them that the young ones die first, their inexperience and small stature making them easy targets for enemy fire. But the children's enthusiasm for battle serves a purpose beyond their military effectiveness. Their willingness to die inspires the adults to greater acts of courage, their faith reminding hardened veterans why they fight. In the calculations of imperial command, a child who dies gloriously serves the emperor more effectively than one who lives cautiously. After each battle, the survivors help bury the dead children alongside the fallen adults, offering the same prayers and performing the same rituals. The Departamento Munitorum records their deaths with the same bureaucratic precision used for any other imperial asset lost in combat. Their names, when they are remembered at all, are carved into memorial stones that list them alongside the adults who died beside them, making no distinction between the seasoned warrior and the child who should have been learning to read instead of learning to kill. The families of these children, when they exist, receive the same death benefits paid to the families of adult soldiers. The official letters of condolence use the same formal language, praising the child's courage and dedication to imperial service. These letters do not mention that the child died screaming for their mother, or that they spent their last moments trying to crawl to safety through mud made from their own blood. Such details would serve no purpose beyond causing additional grief to bereaved families. In the depths of hive cities, children work in munitions factories where a single mistake could trigger explosions that would kill hundreds. Their small fingers are prized for their ability to handle the most delicate components of explosive devices, their natural agility allowing them to work faster than adult laborers. The factory overseers provide them with stimulants to keep them alert during 20-hour shifts, knowing that fatigue leads to accidents, and accidents lead to production delays that could affect supply lines across entire subsectors. The children who work in these factories develop respiratory diseases from constant exposure to toxic chemicals, nervous system damage from handling unstable compounds, and psychological disorders from the constant stress of knowing that any moment could be their last. The Adeptus Mechanicus medical staff assigned to these facilities treat their conditions with the same clinical detachment they would show toward malfunctioning machinery. Lung scarring is addressed with surgical modifications that increase oxygen efficiency. Nerve damage is corrected with bionic implants that restore motor function. Psychological trauma is treated with chemical mood stabilizers that eliminate fear responses while maintaining work productivity. These treatments are not provided out of compassion but out of economic necessity. A child worker represents a significant investment in training and conditioning, and allowing them to die from preventable medical conditions would waste Imperial resources. The children themselves are taught to be grateful for the medical attention, to see their modifications as gifts that allow them to serve the Emperor more effectively. Many of them do feel genuine gratitude, their understanding of their situation shaped entirely by Imperial propaganda and their lack of exposure to alternative perspectives. The most promising of these child workers are selected for advancement to supervisory positions, where they will oversee the next generation of juvenile laborers. These promoted children often display particular cruelty toward their former peers, driven by a psychological need to justify their own suffering by ensuring that others endure the same hardships. They implement productivity improvements that increase work quotas while reducing safety measures, calculating that higher mortality rates are acceptable if they result in greater overall output. The cycle perpetuates itself with mathematical precision. Children brutalized by the system grow up to become its most enthusiastic enforcers, their own traumatic experiences transformed into weapons they use against the next generation. They see no alternative to this pattern because they have never been shown one. They cannot imagine a world where children are valued for their potential rather than their immediate utility, because such a world exists nowhere in their experience. In the cathedral schools of shrine worlds, children kneel for hours in prayer while their knees bleed through worn fabric. They memorize scripture that teaches them to embrace suffering as a path to spiritual enlightenment, to view their pain as evidence of the Emperor's love rather than signs of abuse. The scars that cover their backs from ritual flagellation are worn with pride, visible proof of their devotion to Imperial doctrine. Many of them will carry these scars for the rest of their lives, constant reminders of the childhood they spent learning to worship their own pain. The priests who oversee their education were themselves raised in similar institutions, their capacity for compassion systematically destroyed through decades of indoctrination. They genuinely believe that the suffering they inflict on children is necessary for their spiritual development, that physical pain purifies the soul and prepares young minds to receive divine truth. They can recite extensive theological justifications for their practices, drawing on millennia of Imperial doctrine to support their methods. These priests keep detailed records of their students' progress, measuring spiritual advancement through tolerance for physical discomfort and enthusiasm for self-inflicted punishment. Children who show exceptional dedication to these practices are marked for advancement to positions within the ecclesiarchy, where they will spend their adult lives perpetuating the same cycle of sanctified abuse they experienced in their youth. The most gifted may even be selected for training as drill abbots, specialists in breaking down individual identity and replacing it with absolute submission to imperial authority. The process of creating these religious authorities requires the systematic destruction of everything that makes childhood precious. Curiosity is replaced with blind faith. Creativity is channeled into elaborate forms of self-punishment. The natural desire for love and acceptance is redirected toward an emperor who demands everything and gives nothing in return. The children who survive this process become perfect servants of the Imperial Creed, but they cease to be recognizably human in any meaningful sense. In the deepest vaults of the Adeptus Mechanicus, tech priests conduct experiments on children that would horrify even the most hardened Imperial Guard veteran. These experiments are not acts of sadism, but carefully controlled research projects designed to determine optimal methods for converting human consciousness into machine logic. The children used as test subjects are typically failed Schola progenium students, individuals who showed promise during initial screening but proved unsuitable for standard Imperial service. The experiments involve gradual replacement of organic neural tissue with mechanical components, monitoring the subject's retention of memory, personality, and cognitive function at each stage of the conversion process. The children are kept conscious throughout most of the procedures, their reactions and responses recorded for analysis. Those who maintain psychological stability through extensive mechanical modification are deemed successful test subjects. Those who suffer mental breakdown are classified as useful failures, their data contributing to refinements in future conversion protocols. The tech priests who conduct these experiments view them as sacred work, acts of devotion to the Omnissiah that will ultimately benefit all of humanity by advancing the knowledge of human-machine integration. They maintain detailed theoretical frameworks that classify the children's suffering as a necessary component of scientific progress, no different from the stress testing performed on mechanical components. The children's pain is data, their fear is a variable to be controlled, their humanity is an obstacle to be overcome in pursuit of perfect machine consciousness. Some of these experiments produce subjects who retain enough human consciousness to understand what has been done to them. These partial converts often beg for death, their remaining emotional centers overwhelmed by horror at their mechanical transformation. The tech priests typically respond to such requests by removing the subject's capacity for emotional distress, viewing their psychological suffering as evidence of incomplete conversion rather than grounds for mercy. The subjects who survive this final modification become perfect examples of Imperial efficiency, human intelligence guided by machine logic, utterly devoted to the Omnissiah's will, and completely incapable of experiencing regret for what they have lost. Across the width and breadth of Imperial space, the machinery of childhood consumption operates with relentless efficiency. Orphanages channel traumatized children into military service. Industrial complexes burn through juvenile workers like ammunition in a protracted siege. Religious institutions transform natural wonder into fanatical devotion. Military academies convert playground games into training for systematic violence. Medical facilities, experimental procedures that reduce children to laboratory specimens. Each institution operates according to its own logic, but all serve the same ultimate purpose: converting human potential into imperial power. The administrators who oversee these systems file regular reports on their efficiency, measuring success in terms of output rather than human cost. A Schola progenium that graduates 90% of its students to imperial service is considered more successful than one that graduates only 80%, regardless of the psychological damage inflicted on the survivors. A munitions factory that increases production by 15% is commended for operational excellence, even if the improvement comes at the cost of worker safety and life expectancy. These reports are written by adults who were themselves products of the same system, their childhood experiences of systematic brutalization transformed into professional expertise in managing similar institutions. They can calculate the optimal age for beginning military training, the most effective methods for breaking down individual identity, the precise dosage of chemicals needed to enhance productivity without causing immediate death. Their expertise is genuine, and their dedication to imperial service is absolute, but their humanity was sacrificed long ago on the altar of institutional efficiency. The children currently suffering in these institutions will grow up to become the next generation of administrators, their own traumatic experiences providing them with intimate knowledge of the most effective methods for processing human raw material into useful imperial servants. They will implement improvements based on their personal understanding of what breaks the human spirit most efficiently, their childhood suffering transformed into professional qualifications for managing similar programs. The cycle continues because it must continue. The Imperium requires a steady supply of fanatically loyal servants, individuals who will sacrifice everything for the Emperor's glory without hesitation or regret. Such devotion cannot be taught to adults who retain memories of alternatives. It must be instilled in children before they develop the capacity to question the system that shapes them. The brutalization of childhood is not an unfortunate side effect of imperial necessity. It is the foundation upon which the entire structure of imperial civilization rests. In the end, the children who survive their transformation into imperial servants often express gratitude for their experiences. They have been taught to view their suffering as a gift, their lost innocence as a sacrifice that gave their lives meaning. They cannot imagine any existence other than service to the Emperor because they have been systematically prevented from developing the capacity to envision alternatives. Their contentment with their fate is perhaps the most disturbing aspect of their conditioning, evidence of a system so perfectly calibrated that it convinces its victims to embrace their own destruction. The Imperium's use of children in war extends far beyond the simple deployment of young soldiers on active battlefields. It encompasses a vast network of institutions, practices, and ideologies that systematically identify, collect, process, and deploy human juveniles as resources in the eternal struggle against the enemies of mankind. This system operates with such thoroughness and efficiency that most imperial citizens never question its necessity, viewing the consumption of childhood as simply another aspect of the natural order. Every imperial world contributes to this system in its own way, shaped by local conditions but guided by universal principles established in the earliest days of the Imperium. Hive worlds provide masses of expendable workers and soldiers, their vast populations ensuring that individual lives carry minimal value. Agri-worlds contribute children hardened by rural labor and accustomed to the harsh realities of survival. Forge worlds supply juveniles who have already begun the process of replacing flesh with machinery. Death worlds offer children who have learned to kill before they learn to read. Each world type produces its own specialized contribution to the imperial war machine, but all serve the same ultimate purpose. The Adeptus Administratum maintains detailed projections of juvenile resource availability across the Imperium, calculating expected yields from each world based on population growth, mortality rates, and recruitment quotas. These projections are updated annually, adjusted for local conditions such as planetary wars, industrial accidents, and religious festivals that might affect the supply of available children. The bureaucrats who compile these reports work with the same methodical precision they apply to managing supplies of ammunition or rations, viewing children as another form of renewable resource that must be carefully managed to ensure optimal utilization. Regional variations in child utilization reflect local military needs and cultural traditions. In the segmentum solar, children are more likely to be channeled into administrative roles or specialized technical positions, their education emphasizing bureaucratic efficiency and technological competence. In the eastern fringe, where tyrannid invasions create constant demand for expendable soldiers, children are more commonly trained for direct combat roles. In the Eye of Terror's periphery, where chaos corruption poses constant threats, children undergo more intensive psychological screening and conditioning to ensure their loyalty remains absolute under extreme stress. But beneath these regional variations lies a consistent pattern: the systematic conversion of natural human development into imperial utility. Children who might have become artists become propagandists. Children who might have become teachers become indoctrinators. Children who might have become healers become torturers in service of imperial security. Children who might have become explorers become soldiers sent to die on distant worlds they will never understand. The transformation is so complete that most imperial citizens cannot conceive of alternative uses for children. When presented with historical accounts of ancient societies that valued childhood innocence or encouraged creative play, most Imperials respond with confusion or disgust. They view such practices as wasteful, even immoral, a squandering of valuable human resources that could have been put to productive use. Their inability to see children as anything other than raw material for Imperial industry reflects the success of a conditioning process that began in their own childhood and continues throughout their adult lives. This conditioning operates at every level of Imperial society, from the lowest hive worker to the highest planetary governor. Imperial law provides extensive protections for adult citizens against arbitrary detention, forced labor, and physical abuse, but these same protections do not extend to children. Imperial legal doctrine holds that children are not yet fully human, that they exist in a state of potential humanity that must be actualized through service to the Emperor. This legal framework enables the systematic exploitation of juveniles while maintaining the fiction that Imperial society respects human dignity and individual rights. The religious foundations of this system run deeper than mere legal doctrine. Imperial theology teaches that the Emperor loves humanity most when it sacrifices itself for his glory, and that the purest form of sacrifice is the offering of innocence on the altar of duty. Children who die in Imperial service are not victims of an oppressive system, but martyrs whose deaths bring them closer to the Emperor's divine presence. Their suffering is not evidence of institutional cruelty, but proof of their spiritual devotion. Their lost childhood is not a tragedy, but a gift freely given to the Master of mankind. These theological justifications provide psychological comfort to adults who participate in the system, allowing them to view their actions as morally righteous rather than simply necessary. Parents who surrender their children to Imperial institutions genuinely believe they are providing their offspring with opportunities for spiritual advancement. Teachers who brutalize their students consider themselves instruments of divine will. Administrators who process children like industrial components see themselves as servants of a higher purpose that transcends individual human concerns. The most sophisticated Imperial philosophers have developed elaborate theoretical frameworks that redefine childhood itself as a form of pre-human existence, a larval stage of development that must be transcended rather than cherished. According to these theories, the natural impulses of childhood, curiosity, playfulness, emotional attachment to family members, represent primitive evolutionary remnants that must be eliminated to make room for more advanced forms of consciousness centered on service to the Emperor. The systematic suppression of childish behaviors is not child abuse, but a form of accelerated evolution, helping young humans achieve their full potential as Imperial servants. These philosophical systems are taught in Imperial universities and debated in scholarly journals, their academic respectability lending intellectual credibility to practices that would be recognized as monstrous by any objective standard. Students who show excessive interest in alternative theoretical frameworks are marked for additional loyalty screening, ensuring that questioning the fundamental assumptions of Imperial child utilization remains professionally dangerous for anyone seeking advancement within Imperial educational institutions. The practical implementation of these theories requires vast institutional infrastructure dedicated to the processing of children. The Schola progenium represents only the most visible element of this infrastructure, serving primarily upper-class orphans whose parents died in notable Imperial service. Far larger and less celebrated are the countless municipal orphanages, industrial training centers, military preparatory schools, and religious academies that handle the majority of Imperial children deemed suitable for institutional processing. These institutions operate according to standardized protocols developed over millennia of experience in breaking down individual identity and rebuilding it around Imperial service. New arrivals undergo assessment periods designed to identify their optimal utility to the Imperium, with psychological testing, physical examination, and aptitude screening determining whether they are best suited for military service, industrial labor, administrative work, or religious duties. Children who show exceptional promise in multiple areas may be selected for more specialized forms of conditioning, while those who demonstrate unusual resistance to standard procedures are typically assigned to the most dangerous and expendable roles. The assessment process itself serves as the first stage of conditioning, teaching children that their value depends entirely on their utility to imperial institutions. Children learn to compete desperately for favorable assignments, understanding that failure to demonstrate appropriate skills or attitudes will result in placement in roles with minimal life expectancy. This competition destroys natural bonds of friendship and cooperation between children, replacing them with relationships based on mutual surveillance and competitive advantage seeking. Once assignments are made, the real work of transformation begins. Children destined for military service undergo physical conditioning that would be considered abusive if applied to adult soldiers. Their developing bodies pushed beyond normal limits through chemical enhancement, surgical modification, and psychological conditioning that eliminates natural fear responses. Children selected for administrative roles receive education that systematically eliminates emotional responses to human suffering, teaching them to view mass death and systematic oppression as routine aspects of efficient governance. Children chosen for religious service undergo conditioning that replaces natural spiritual curiosity with absolute faith in imperial doctrine, their capacity for independent theological thought systematically eliminated through repetitive indoctrination and punishment for asking unauthorized questions. Children designated for industrial work receive training that values productivity above personal safety, teaching them to view workplace injuries and toxic exposure as acceptable costs of serving the emperor's economic needs. Each specialization requires its own particular form of psychological conditioning, but all share common elements designed to eliminate traces of individual identity that might interfere with institutional loyalty. Children learn to think of themselves not as unique individuals with personal desires and aspirations, but as interchangeable components in the vast machine of imperial power. Their names are replaced with numerical designations. Their personal histories are rewritten to emphasize service to the emperor rather than family relationships or individual achievements. Their emotional responses are chemically regulated to eliminate feelings that might conflict with institutional obedience. The success of this conditioning is measured through regular testing that evaluates not just technical competence, but psychological compliance with institutional expectations. Children who show signs of retaining individual identity or emotional attachment to pre-institutional experiences are subjected to additional conditioning until these traces of personality are eliminated. Those who prove resistant to standard conditioning techniques may be subjected to more extreme measures, including surgical modification of brain tissue, chemical alteration of neural chemistry, or psychological torture designed to break down remaining traces of independent thought. The most successful products of this conditioning process often become instructors in the same institutions that shaped them, their own traumatic experiences providing them with intimate knowledge of the most effective methods for breaking down child psychology. These instructors typically display particular skill at identifying and eliminating traces of individual identity in new students, their personal understanding of the conditioning process making them exceptionally effective at replicating it in others. Adult imperial citizens who encounter the products of these institutions often express admiration for their discipline, dedication, and selfless service to imperial goals. They see these individuals as exemplars of proper human development, proof that the imperial system successfully transforms raw human potential into useful social function. They do not recognize the systematic destruction of human personality that enabled this transformation because they themselves underwent similar processes that eliminated their capacity to recognize or value individual human uniqueness. The children currently undergoing this conditioning will grow up to become the administrators, instructors, and ideologues who perpetuate the system for the next generation. Their own experiences of systematic dehumanization will become professional qualifications that enable them to design and implement even more efficient methods for processing future children. The system improves continuously, not through external reform or humanitarian intervention, but through the accumulated expertise of individuals whose childhoods were sacrificed to understand the most effective methods for destroying childhood itself. The economic implications of this system extend far beyond the immediate productivity gains achieved through child labor. By ensuring that each new generation enters adulthood already conditioned for absolute obedience to imperial authority, the system eliminates the need for expensive adult police forces, extensive surveillance networks, or complex legal systems designed to manage civil disobedience. Adults who were properly processed as children require minimal supervision, governing themselves according to internalized imperial values that make external coercion unnecessary. This represents a profound economic advantage over less systematically organized societies, where significant resources must be devoted to managing adult populations that retain capacity for independent thought and resistance to governmental authority. The imperial investment in childhood conditioning pays dividends throughout each individual's adult lifetime, generating decades of productive labor and military service from persons who genuinely believe that serving the emperor represents the highest possible achievement of human existence. The Departamento Munitorum has calculated that each properly conditioned child generates approximately 14 times their processing cost in economic value over their productive lifetime, not including the additional value created by their offspring, who inherit genetic predispositions toward imperial loyalty. These calculations do not account for the psychological costs of the conditioning process, because imperial economics does not recognize psychological well-being as a meaningful category of value. Human happiness, creativity, spiritual fulfillment, and emotional health are treated as luxury goods that the Imperium cannot afford in its eternal struggle for survival. Regional commanders who achieve above-average efficiency in child processing receive commendations and promotion opportunities, creating career incentives that drive continuous improvement in conditioning techniques. The most successful administrators often publish treatises on optimal methods for juvenile resource utilization, their expertise sought after by colleagues across the Imperium who seek to replicate their results. These publications are written in the dry, technical language of industrial management, treating children as manufacturing inputs rather than sentient beings capable of suffering. The children who will grow up to write the next generation of these treatises are currently undergoing the conditioning that will enable them to view such work as morally praiseworthy rather than fundamentally evil. They are learning to measure human value in terms of productivity metrics, to view individual suffering as acceptable when it serves larger institutional goals, to find personal satisfaction in the efficient management of systematic brutality. Their education is preparing them to perpetuate and improve upon the system that destroyed their own childhoods, ensuring that future generations will face even more sophisticated and effective forms of dehumanization. On the ocean world of Catachan 4, children too young to swim are pressed into service as deep-sea salvage workers, their small bodies allowing them to access the cramped spaces within sunken imperial vessels where valuable equipment might be recovered. They work in pressure suits that were designed for adults, the excess space filled with padding that often shifts during descent, crushing their bodies against the metal framework. The pressure changes required for deep diving cause permanent damage to their developing nervous systems, but the equipment they recover often includes rare technological components worth more than the projected lifetime earnings of dozens of adult workers. These children develop a form of religious ecstasy around their work, taught to interpret the crushing pressure of the deep ocean as the Emperor's embrace and the constant risk of death as evidence of his personal attention to their service. They compete with each other to reach greater depths and recover more valuable salvage, their young minds unable to comprehend that they are being systematically murdered for economic gain. When they die, as most do before reaching adolescence, their bodies are processed into protein paste that feeds the survivors, nothing wasted in the perfect efficiency of imperial resource management. The adult supervisors who manage these operations were themselves child salvage workers, The few who survived long enough to develop the expertise necessary for managing similar programs. They can calculate optimal descent rates, predict equipment failure patterns, and estimate child life expectancy under various working conditions with mathematical precision. Their knowledge is purchased with the lives of the children they once worked beside, their expertise built upon a foundation of systematically accumulated trauma that they now inflict upon the next generation. In the crystal mines of Mordian Seventh, children crawl through tunnels barely wider than their bodies, following veins of rare minerals that adult miners cannot reach. The crystal formations slice through their skin and embed microscopic shards in their lungs, causing respiratory diseases that will kill them within months of beginning work. But during those months, they extract materials essential for the construction of Imperial technology, their small size and expendable status making them the only economically viable method for accessing these resources. The children learn to navigate by touch in absolute darkness, their other senses becoming hyperacute as their eyesight fails from prolonged exposure to toxic mineral dust. They develop their own system of communication based on tapping sounds that travel through the crystal formations, creating a primitive language that allows them to coordinate their work and warn each other of impending tunnel collapses. This language dies with them, never documented by the adult overseers who view their communication as merely another aspect of their training rather than evidence of their continued humanity. The minerals they extract become components in weapons that will be used to kill other children on distant battlefields, the fruits of their suffering transformed into instruments of death that will create new orphans to feed into the Imperial processing system. The children who mine these materials will never live long enough to understand the ultimate purpose of their labor, dying in darkness and pain while believing that their sacrifice serves some greater good they are too young to comprehend. On the cemetery world of Krieg, children are raised from birth to view death in service to the Emperor as the highest possible achievement of human existence. Their education consists primarily of studying the tactics used in the most catastrophic military defeats in Imperial history, learning to find inspiration in accounts of entire armies destroyed in futile attacks against overwhelming enemy forces. They are taught that survival is evidence of cowardice, that retreat is the ultimate sin, that the only honorable death is one that serves Imperial strategic objectives regardless of its tactical pointlessness. These children undergo surgical modification before they reach adolescence, receiving implants that will detonate if they attempt to flee from combat or surrender to enemy forces. They are told that these devices are gifts from the Emperor, proof of his confidence in their courage and devotion. Most of them genuinely believe this explanation, their understanding of their situation shaped entirely by propaganda that presents systematic mutilation as evidence of divine favor. The children of Krieg march to war, singing hymns that celebrate the beauty of death in Imperial service, their young voices rising above the sound of artillery and the screams of the wounded. They charge enemy positions with the same enthusiasm that children on more civilized worlds might show for games or festivals, their natural exuberance channeled into acts of systematic self-destruction. When they die, as they invariably do, their final words are typically expressions of gratitude for the opportunity to serve the Emperor through their deaths. The adult commanders who deploy these children in combat calculate their effectiveness not in terms of tactical objectives achieved, but in terms of enemy resources expended in killing them. A single child soldier who forces the enemy to waste ammunition represents a strategic victory, even if the child accomplishes nothing else before dying. Multiple child soldiers who force the enemy to divert attention from more important targets represent a tactical masterstroke, regardless of the human cost involved in implementing such strategies. In the vast data processing centers that manage Imperial communications, children with exceptional mathematical abilities spend their abbreviated lives calculating firing solutions for weapons they will never see, managing supply logistics for armies they will never join, and processing casualty reports for battles they will never understand. Their young minds, unencumbered by adult concerns about the moral implications of their work, prove exceptionally effective at the rapid processing of complex mathematical relationships required for modern warfare. These children work in complete isolation, their individual workstations designed to prevent communication with their peers that might lead to the development of emotional relationships that could interfere with their productivity. They receive mathematical problems through electronic interfaces and return solutions through the same systems, never interacting directly with human supervisors or understanding the practical applications of their calculations. Many of them begin to think of numbers as more real than the physical world, their mathematical abstractions becoming their entire universe. The problems they solve determine whether orbital bombardments will successfully eliminate enemy installations or accidentally destroy Imperial forces, whether supply convoys will reach their destinations or be intercepted by hostile forces, whether military campaigns will succeed or fail catastrophically. Their childhood games of mathematical puzzle solving have consequences that ripple across entire subsectors, affecting the lives and deaths of millions of people they will never meet. When their minds finally break under the strain of constant mathematical processing, as they inevitably do, they are typically repurposed for simpler computational tasks until their mental degradation progresses to the point where they become useless for any form of productive labor. At that point, they are usually processed into nutrient paste that feeds the next generation of child mathematicians, their final service to the Emperor consisting of providing sustenance for their replacements. The Adeptus Mechanicus maintains detailed records of optimal mathematical processing techniques, constantly refining their methods for extracting maximum computational value from juvenile neural tissue. They have determined that children between the ages of 8 and 12 show the highest efficiency for pure mathematical calculation, while older children become distracted by developing emotional and social needs that interfere with their computational focus. Younger children lack the cognitive development necessary for complex problem-solving but show promise for simpler pattern recognition tasks. These research findings are implemented across the Imperium wherever mathematical processing capabilities are required, creating a standardized system for converting childhood intellectual potential into computational resources. The children who provide the data for this research are not informed that they are experimental subjects, their understanding of their situation limited to the belief that they are specially chosen servants of the Emperor, whose mathematical gifts represent divine favor, rather than genetic accidents that make them useful for exploitation. On the Forge world of Mars itself, the most sacred site of the Adeptus Mechanicus, children destined for full conversion to machine consciousness undergo procedures that systematically replace their organic neural tissue with mechanical components. The process begins with the replacement of sensory organs, their natural eyes, ears, and tactile receptors substituted with mechanical devices that provide enhanced perception but eliminate the subjective experience of sensation. Children who once enjoyed the taste of food or the warmth of sunlight gradually lose their capacity to experience physical pleasure, their world becoming a series of data inputs processed by increasingly mechanical thought patterns. The conversion process is designed to preserve intellectual capacity while eliminating emotional responses that might interfere with optimal decision-making. The children retain their memories of organic existence, but these memories become increasingly abstract, divorced from any emotional content that might cause them to question the value of their transformation. They can remember having parents, but they cannot remember what parental love felt like. They can recall playing games, but they cannot access the joy they once experienced during play. As the conversion progresses, the children begin to view their organic past as a form of primitive existence that they have transcended rather than a childhood that was stolen from them. They develop genuine enthusiasm for each stage of mechanical enhancement, their altered neural chemistry making them incapable of regretting what they have lost. By the time the process is complete, they have become perfect servants of the Omnissiah, utterly devoted to the pursuit of mechanical perfection and completely incapable of human emotional responses. These converted children grow up to become the tech priests who design and implement the conversion procedures used on future generations, their intimate understanding of the transformation process making them exceptionally skilled at managing similar operations. They can identify optimal conversion schedules, predict psychological responses to specific procedures, and calculate the most efficient methods for eliminating residual human consciousness that might interfere with mechanical function. The irony that these experts in dehumanization were themselves victims of the same process is lost on them, their modified consciousness incapable of recognizing the tragedy of their situation. They view their childhood conversion as the most fortunate event of their existence, the moment when they transcended the limitations of organic life and achieved communion with the divine machine. Their enthusiasm for converting other children stems from genuine religious conviction rather than sadistic pleasure, making them more effective at their work than operators motivated by simple cruelty. In the training academies of the Officio Assassinorum, children selected for their exceptional potential as killers undergo conditioning that makes the Schola Progenium seem gentle by comparison. These children, typically recruited from the survivors of planetary genocides or the offspring of executed traitors, begin their training with minds already shaped by exposure to extreme violence and systematic betrayal. The Assassinorum does not need to break their innocence because they arrive already broken, requiring only guidance in channeling their trauma into useful skills. The training begins with lessons in emotional suppression, teaching the children to identify and eliminate any traces of empathy, compassion, or moral restraint that might interfere with their effectiveness as killers. They are forced to torture and kill animals, then fellow students who fail to meet performance standards, gradually desensitizing them to violence until taking life becomes as natural as breathing. Those who show signs of emotional distress during these exercises are subjected to chemical conditioning that permanently alters their brain chemistry, eliminating their capacity for normal human emotional responses. Advanced students learn to mimic emotional responses they no longer feel, developing skills in social manipulation that allow them to blend into civilian populations while maintaining their ability to kill without hesitation or regret. They study human psychology not to understand or connect with other people, but to identify weaknesses they can exploit in pursuit of their assassination targets. Their education in human nature serves only to make them more effective at destroying the humans they are sent to eliminate. The children who survive this training become living weapons, utterly loyal to imperial authority and completely incapable of moral qualms about their assignments. They can kill political dissidents, rival nobles, suspected heretics, or anyone else designated as a threat to imperial stability with the same emotional detachment they might show toward routine maintenance tasks. Their childhood experiences of systematic dehumanization have prepared them perfectly for careers spent systematically dehumanizing others through violence. The Assassinorum keeps detailed psychological profiles on all successful graduates, studying their mental conditioning to identify techniques that can be applied to future training programs. They have determined that children who witness the deaths of their parents show higher aptitude for assassination work than those who are simply removed from their families through bureaucratic processes. Children who survive extended periods of torture demonstrate superior resistance to interrogation techniques that might be used against them during covert operations. This research is conducted with the same clinical detachment that characterizes all imperial studies of human psychology, treating the systematic brutalization of children as a necessary component of scientific inquiry rather than evidence of institutional sadism. The researchers who compile this data were themselves products of similar training programs, their own traumatic childhoods, providing them with personal insight into the most effective methods for destroying human emotional development. Across every level of imperial society, the consumption of childhood continues with relentless efficiency. In the highest spires of noble families, children are conditioned to view other humans as resources to be exploited rather than individuals deserving of consideration. In the deepest underhive settlements, children learn to kill for scraps of food, and consider such violence a normal aspect of human interaction. In the void ships that travel between stars, children work in the most dangerous sections of the vessel. Their small bodies, expendable assets used to maintain systems that would be too costly to repair through conventional means. Each of these environments produces its own specialized form of trauma, its own particular method for converting natural human development into imperial utility, but all serve the same ultimate purpose: ensuring that each new generation of imperial citizens enters adulthood already conditioned for absolute obedience to imperial authority, incapable of questioning the system that shaped them, and enthusiastically committed to perpetuating similar conditioning for their own offspring. The success of this system can be measured not just in terms of productivity or military effectiveness, but in the complete absence of large-scale resistance to imperial authority. Despite the obvious brutality of imperial governance, adult imperial citizens who were properly processed as children simply cannot conceive of alternative social arrangements, their imaginations limited to variations within existing imperial structures rather than fundamental challenges to imperial power itself. When imperial citizens encounter evidence of societies that treat children differently, they typically respond with horror and disgust rather than curiosity or admiration. Historical accounts of civilizations that valued childhood innocence or encouraged creative play are viewed as evidence of decadence and moral corruption rather than alternative approaches to human development. The systematic destruction of their own childhoods has left them incapable of recognizing childhood destruction as tragic rather than necessary. The children currently being processed through imperial institutions will grow up to become the parents, teachers, administrators, and leaders who design and implement the next generation of child processing systems. Their own experiences of systematic brutalization will become professional qualifications that enable them to create even more efficient methods for converting human potential into imperial power. The system improves continuously through the accumulated expertise of individuals whose childhoods were sacrificed to understand the most effective techniques for destroying childhood itself. In the end, the Imperium's use of children in war represents more than simple exploitation of a vulnerable population. It represents the systematic transformation of human development itself into a weapon of social control, ensuring that each new generation enters adulthood already shaped by the very system they will spend their lives perpetuating. The children who suffer in imperial institutions are not merely victims of imperial brutality, they are the raw materials from which imperial brutality continuously recreates itself. Their innocence, the fuel that powers a machine designed to eliminate innocence from human existence entirely. The process is so thorough and so successful that most imperial citizens never recognize it as a process at all. They view the systematic brutalization of children as simply the natural order of things, as inevitable as gravity or death. Their inability to imagine alternatives reflects the success of their own childhood conditioning, proving that the system has achieved its ultimate goal: the creation of a human population incapable of questioning its own systematic dehumanization. And so the machinery grinds on, consuming each new generation of children with the same relentless efficiency that has characterized imperial governance for 10,000 years. The children who will feed this machinery tomorrow are being born today, their futures already determined by systems they do not yet understand, their potential already claimed by institutions that will transform their natural human development into weapons aimed at the hearts of future generations. The Imperium has found the perfect solution to the problem of human resistance to authority: eliminate the capacity for resistance during childhood before it can fully develop. The result is a civilization that maintains absolute political stability through the systematic sacrifice of everything that makes human life worth living, a society that has achieved perfect order by destroying the human capacity to recognize that such order might not be worth its cost. In the silence between the screams of dying children and the prayers of grateful survivors, the truth echoes with perfect clarity. The Imperium does not merely use children in war. It transforms childhood itself into a battlefield, and on that battlefield, innocence never stands a chance.